Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Automation in Transportation call. At this time, all lines have been placed on a listen-only mode, and we will open the floor for your questions and comments following the presentation. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to your host, David Ross. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Kate, and welcome everyone for another terrific Stifel conference call that we've got going on. This one is going to be about automation and how technology is going to help achieve digital transformation this year. With us, we have Tommy Barnes, who's going to be leading, the presentation. He's president of Project 44, and we've also got Rob Estes, who's president of Estes Express, and Jen Schopfer, who's VP of GE Transportation Logistics. So, very excited to introduce this group of speakers to you all. We're going to open it up for questions from the broader audience at the end. In the meantime, you can listen to Tommy, Jen, and Rob talk about the topic of the day. If you did not get the slides for some reason, just email my teammate Austin Remy, and he will send them over. His email address is remea@stifel.com, STIFEL.com, if you do not have the slides. But with that, Tommy, all you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and the Stifel team for hosting us this morning. And thanks, Rob and Jen, for jumping on this morning as well. Dave, I know we talked about the agenda here. I'm going to walk through around 10 slides that are, I'll call kind of the state of the state or state of the market. And that'll be quick, by the way. We're not going to do a lot of talking about slides. Then we'll move to a discussion with Rob, Jen, and myself. And I've got a series of questions to ask. I'm very good at staying on point. I'll wander off script about 20 seconds into it, as we probably all know. But it should be a good discussion. And Dave, you have some other, you'll lead some Q&A at the back end of the discussion as well. So it should be a great hour or so. So Dave, I know you emailed out the slides. I'm going to kind of quickly walk through each, and I'll just name the slide number so folks that are listening in can follow along. But we're talking about the end-to-end visibility needs in today's supply chain, and we're going to talk through kind of a lead up to the Q&A that we're going to be having this morning with the problem statements, what we're seeing, where we see the industry going, and we also have some kind of back-end case studies that are GE and Estes specific that kind of highlight some things that both of those organizations are doing to drive the digitalization trend in today's marketplace. So those of you that are following along, going back to slide number 2, you'll see a series of questions on this slide. And these are common questions that we all hear with a high level of frequency, if not hourly, daily, weekly. Where's my product? What shipments are at risk? What if there's a storm or an event or a hurricane? Why does an inventory database match what's in my TMS? We're trying to move more efficiently, but the communication across the industry is still very broken and fraught with opportunity. Slide number 3 is just a visual for those that are looking at these slides. I mean, this is something we pretty much all know, but the global supply chain is just fraught with nodes and different points of connectivity that are frankly just very broken across the distributor, manufacturer, customer, shipper networks. They're all very fragmented, and it's very hard to get to a good place as a result. Slide number 4, again, this also demonstrates the fragmented supply chain visibility space that we're in today. And you can see we like to list the dollars here because there's many dollars associated with these different broken processes. And when I say dollars, it could be revenue dollars, and it could be efficiency and productivity dollars that are associated as well. But this depicts the kind of the relationship between third-party companies, logistics companies, shippers, carriers, and operating systems like TMSs, WMSs, those type of foundational platforms. Going to slide number 5, you can see the disconnected shipment lifecycle. And this is we have the old school graphics on here for those that are viewing to show it kind of indicates and shows the experience that folks have. A couple of key things that stick out in this for me when I look at this, I see unhappy customers, I see customer churn, I see significant admin cost, and I see limited visibility. And all those things are problematic in today's communication layers. So if you go to the next slide, I'm on slide number 6. Shippers manage thousands of shipments per day, and errors compound rapidly. We've done some research work, and we show that over 60% of our sample shipment or shipper segments, over 60% of those shippers have exceptions with their shipments in some way, shape, or form. And obviously that creates a lot of manual work and leads to ultimately very, very poor customer experience. Slide number 7 is a build slide, but again, this is kind of stating the obvious that the cloud changes everything. But you have to achieve a seamless kind of layer across, a visibility layer across the entire life cycle. So you've got accurate data, you've got automated processes, end-to-end visibility of all those things is ultra critical and ultra important, which leads to smart decision making because you actually have actionable data and information. And at the end result, happy customers, which is what matters the most. One slide we pulled in this to show some of the factual information that's been gathered. The gap between the strong and the weak is widening in a pretty large way. And I don't have to read this slide to those of you that are looking, but you can see that 55% of organizations are underperforming compared to peers, and this is from our friends at Gartner who do a phenomenal job pulling this together. But you can see the other two slides. Go to the far right, 2.5 times below average companies that are 2.5 times more likely to be conservative adopters on technology. And so we're seeing these trends kind of playing out in front of us today, which is a big basis for what we're talking about in this call. Next 2 slides are more kind of case study builds. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because I'll be doing Jen a major injustice. But Jen and her team are leading a large initiative with the Port of Los Angeles, which is kind of step 1 in their global journey of visibility across the shipment networks that they manage. But it talks about the port optimizers and the things that they're doing. We're going to touch on this in a lot more detail later with Jen giving commentary. Slide number 10 is really we'll call a case study for Estes Express lines. It's more catered towards the less than truckload networks specifically. So, and Rob and team have done a phenomenal job of focusing on different ways to enhance and to use technology as a competitive advantage. And I mean, they're doing a lot of things around automation that frankly most folks aren't doing, that are enhancing their customer experiences, but also making their company as a whole, be it central operations or administrative groups, and also field operations to be more efficient as a result. And last but not least, this is more of kind of a takeaway slide is what I call it, but this is kind of what do we do next? And at the end of the day, what I like to focus on here is, you start with having the right information at the bottom. You can see your x-axis of difficulty and then your y-axis of value. But I like to focus on information and really what I call descriptive analytics and how that moves up that value curve more to foresight into prescriptive analytics. And these things are kind of buzzwordy in nature in today's marketplace, but at the end of the day, they have some true meaning behind them. If you can acquire the right data at the right platform, there's a lot of value and meaning in working up this so-called value curve over a period of time. So that was the slides. Hopefully that wasn't too painful for anyone. Dave, I believe you're going to be able to distribute these, or you already have, to those that didn't receive, which is great. I'm going to move into some Q&A because you guys will get tired of hearing me talk. So I'm going to kind of walk through some questions with Rob and Jen. And I'm going to kind of play point guard here, guys, so go easy on me, okay? And Jen and Rob, I'm going to throw out some questions, more kind of open questions first, and then you guys we can kind of ham and egg and tag these as we go as a group. But I'm going to start with kind of a broader question for this team. But, today's landscape is shifting, as we all know too well, hence the reason we're here. But companies and enterprises are investing in technology strategies, and they're really built for kind of rapid, agile, kind of visibility-based, data-driven decision-making. Who do you think of in terms of companies, or maybe it's even attributes of organizations that are the best or leading in that particular space? And I'll let you guys take that as kind of throw it out to both of you.
Jen, ladies first.
Why, thank you. I think there's many great examples. I would say, without naming specifics, attributes of companies that really excel at leveraging data to make better decisions and using analytics, et cetera, are companies that are willing to take risk, measured risks, of course. But I think if you're going to be a company involved in rapid prototyping, you have to be willing to fail fast, learn from that, pivot, and move on. So that's one attribute that I would mention. The second that I see, especially in the work that we do with railroads and providing TMS and track and trace visibility to shippers, and also the work that we're doing with the Port of Los Angeles and our Port Optimizer product, is the willingness to share data and leadership around that. Supply chain and transportation networks inherently are all connected. There's a lot of different stakeholders. And, dark spots exist in that where people and companies don't share data. And, it doesn't have to be data that gives away a competitive advantage, but just sharing data around planning, I think, is a big theme. And the more willingness I see for that, those companies get benefits, hand over hand. So that'd be a couple from me, Tommy.
Jen, do you think that, just a follow-up question for you, you think that's just more of we talk about sharing and making data readily available. Is that more of a legacy issue, just more of the industry is kind of ingrained in the ways that we are? We just have to realize that sharing has to happen for us to change?
I do, Tommy. I mean, from a technical standpoint, we have the technology. Between API technologies, between big data technologies, you can do this fairly easily, fairly quickly, and really without a ton of burden on the teams. It's more cultural in nature, realizing that, hey, look, as long as we're not sharing things like pricing and truly competitive information with each other, not a lot of harm can be done. So it's more breaking down kind of those cultural barriers, I think.
That's great feedback. Rob, what do you think around the same topic in question?
Thanks, Tommy. What I would say, and I'll give a little brief, Estes is an LTL carrier, so the comments I make today are mostly going to be LTL in nature. As I look back, in 1984, Estes migrated to our first computer from IBM punch cards. So we've had a 34-ish run with technology. I think what's going to happen in the next 2 years is going to eclipse what I have seen in those last 34 years. Technology is changing so fast. It's so important to what we have. And again, you hear this statement. It's not true, but it does say that sometimes the information that we deliver is as important as the freight we deliver. And because of that, the best person I have in my organization, which is not me, which is my son Webb, is heading up my IT group. And as I look out there, I would say as you look at the landscape of technology, what we use in our personal lives, what banks use, which financial institutions use, transportation is lagging. I'm not sure whether that's slow on their part, the connectivity between transportation providers and customers, the fact that sometimes, I'm glad to hear what Jen says, but sometimes the transportation group is at the low end of the totem pole as far as getting resources for IT support. So huge opportunities I see. My dad had a famous statement that if you're not driving a truck or pushing a hand truck, you're dead weight. We do things today the way we did them 15, 20 years ago when we're looking at back office. Communicating with our customers, which is very important. We still do it the same way we did. Somebody hollers out, "Where's that shipment?" And then we go from there, where the technology opportunities are just huge. I think we as a group are all in it. Again, we're focusing a huge amount of resources people and technology to improve what we're doing. I had my son write out some really fancy words that we're switching our development to DevOps and Agile Methodology, and already having great success because we're finding out whether we're succeeding or failing quickly. Another thing we say internally is best is the enemy of better. Sometimes it took an IT project 2 years to get off, and by the time it was developed, it was outdated. Now we're rolling out things in 4-week sprints, and so just excited about what we're doing, and certainly the partners we deal with to help us with the connectivity.
Rob, great feedback. I was going to ask, do you think that, and I'll talk about less than truckload specifically, and without naming names or companies, that's not the purpose of this. Do you see a really a big gap between the groups that get this and the ones that don't? And is there any correlation there, do you think?
I mean, I think all of us, and again, the LTL group, is David talks about all the time, is a lot more concentrated. The top 5, the top 10, the top 25. I think the top 25 LTL carriers are in, have 95% of the LTL market. I think there is a spectrum, but I think we're all average. I do think that I know where we're going. We're not content with average, and we want to be above average. So we're spending aggressively, working with our customers. I'm not going to develop something that looks pretty here, but my customers don't want. It can't help them be more efficient, and it can't help us work more efficiently with them. So we're looking to get feedback and really working hard. But I'm sure my good competitors are doing and feeling the same thing.
That's great feedback. Jen, if I had to ask, kind of go back to ask the same question to you, without naming anybody's by company name or anything, but do you see a kind of have and a have not, meaning the gap has gotten wider between the companies that get it and the organizations that are still struggling?
I do, and I think I like what was just said about getting feedback from the customers. I think that's another differentiating factor as well, is as you're rolling out a new system, as you're developing a new software, actually including the customers and the users in that process, so that when you kind of prototype and rapidly deliver every 2 to 4 weeks, you're getting feedback, you're incorporating that feedback. Ultimately, that makes the product or the system that you're going to roll out get adopted more, and it's going to differentiate the value. And then I think more broadly speaking, transportation providers that are, forward-thinking and really viewing IT systems, visibility solutions, analytics, and information as a competitive advantage, ultimately end up offering a better service to their customers. I mean, if we think about our daily lives, because of Amazon and things like that, you can see, I can order diapers for my son and track it all the way to my house. And the more we can enable similar types of visibility for our customers, we're definitely going to be differentiated.
Yeah, Jen, great feedback. And again, just that core that ties back kind of to this core end-to-end visibility needs that are so prevalent. If I had to, I'm going to move on to another question here, Rob. I'm going to throw this over to you, and you answered a portion of this already with some of the background you gave on Estes and where the organization come from. We talk about how are your worries today different than they were 2 years ago? And I'm going to ask you the same context. What do you think you'll be worrying about 2 years from now? And
drivers.
Yeah.
As I look back 2 years, Tommy, the economy, we've been in this coming out of the Great Recession, this period of slight growth for a long period of time. So, 2 years ago, it was, making sure we had the right freight, but enough freight. An LTL network is an interesting animal. It's 50% of our costs are payroll, but a lot of that payroll, even though you think payroll or employees are a variable cost, they're fixed costs. We have specific runs that we run every night. We have specific P&D schedules that we run every day. So you think of a variable cost, you can up and down based on your freight flows or times of the year, but making sure we had enough, as we call it, feeding the beast, making sure we had enough business to run was what we worried about a couple years ago. Today, it's the economy has changed. Certainly, a lot of dynamics in the truckload space with electronic logging devices. We've seen their average shipment weight go up close to 100 pounds in over a year, which doesn't sound like much, but it's an 8 to 9% increase in weight per bill. And that requires more drivers to move our freight, the average 923 miles that we haul it. So drivers is something we're extremely focused, but adding drivers it's a pretty much a fixed pool of people.
Right.
And if I gain drivers, I'm taking them from somebody else, and so that worries me. Is how do we do that? So we watch that very closely and are focused. And again, making sure as this conference conference today is about is making sure that we're automating and improving our communication and connectivity with our customers. Those would be the two things. Looking forward, I think those two I mentioned are going to be continue to be on the top of my either you call it my worry list or my excitement list. The ones
right.
I want to focus on and get excited about.
Okay, great. Jen, what about from your perspective?
So challenges right now versus in 2 years. I'm have a little bit of a different viewpoint probably because I run a software business. One of the biggest challenges right now, just because there's a lot of software companies and a lot of growth in this space is finding the right talent. So a similar theme to what Rob was saying, but a little bit of a different skill set that I'm looking for. And when I look to hire great software talent, I want, of course, the technical skills. I want someone that knows and understands and fully embraces, agile development methodologies. But I also want someone who understands transportation networks and supply chain. And, that's not a lot of people. That's like looking for a purple unicorn sometimes. And so, when I sit down with a lot of educators, I talk about that. Hey, if you're going to have a data science program or if you're going to have, a software development degree, make sure that you pair that up with some functional expertise as well, whether that be transportation networks or some other function. But the combination of the two is powerful and isn't commonly found. So that's one of the challenges that I definitely face now in the short term. In the longer term, I wouldn't say it's a challenge or concern. I think it's something to stay in front of, but you can't walk a block these days without hearing about blockchain as it relates to transportation, which poses an interesting opportunity, I think, but we don't yet fully know how we're all going to embrace that and how that's going to work across the transportation networks. And so I think that's something we all need to just pay attention to. And inherently, in order for a technology like blockchain to work, there's got to be a provider for it that wins out and scales. And so we've just got to keep our eyes on that because it has the potential to disrupt other solutions. So those are the two I would say, Tommy.
Okay, that's it's great feedback. What about kind of maybe more of a random question for me? We talk a lot about technology. and we talked a little bit about some of our, team members, i.e. drivers and people leadership. Do you see a void in the space today from a talent standpoint to be able to help lead some of these initiatives? And Jen, you made a partial reference to it. Rob, maybe it's more directed at you as well. Do you see any talent gaps or acquisition of talent a big deal as it relates to kind of pushing forward on some of these things?
Jen, do you want to go first again?
Sure, thank you. One example that's maybe interesting is in the rail industry specifically. There's an aging workforce, and so they're facing a lot of retirement, and a lot of expertise is leaving the industry as a result of that. And so it's an interesting time for digitization in the railroad industry because of that, because you have the opportunity to digitize some of that expertise to minimize that risk. But at the same time, as a younger workforce is joining these organizations, and coming out of college now, all of the folks in that age group are used to technology, right? And so if they're joining a railroad and working in a legacy system or worse in a manual process, that's just not how they're used to working. So I think that poses a great opportunity right now, specifically for the railroad industry to fully embrace digitization.
Great.
I mean, I'll throw in my obviously the generation coming out of colleges today or coming out of schools today and coming into the workforce are not going in to be truck drivers. So that goes back to my former problem. But there are certainly a lot of smart folks coming on board. We work hard because our industry, and especially, again, looking at the LTL space, it's fairly complicated. I know somebody new into airspace. We should come out with a primer. They have that primer, how you talk Southern. We need to come a primer, how you talk trucking. Because there's so many acronyms that we use that sometimes it takes. They understand the technology and what to do before they understand what they're doing. So acquiring good talent, keeping talent, I would say, is a challenge because although a lot of smart people, those smart people have a tendency to grow restless and move on. So making sure we continue to energize, encourage that force is really important. In Estes, here in Richmond, I was probably the only person in the city of Richmond that was rooting against Amazon picking us as the East Coast point, because I knew talent that they were looking for would be the same talent I'd be looking for. And so I was glad when we were not on the short list, but getting that good talent, continuing to encourage them, get them to think like a trucker, which is may sound bad, but I think it sounds good, is important for us.
Well, you make a great point, Rob, and you both made kind of references to this. I think that the companies, this is my opinion, and I think you both kind of come to the same place, is that you need a good blend of domain, Rob, in the case in this world of understanding of trucking. Jen, in your world, a heavy understanding of railroading and understanding what that means, combined with technical expertise. And that combination, or at least an understanding of, I should say, that creates kind of a utopian scenario to be able to derive value going forward.
Couldn't agree more. The purple unicorn.
The purple unicorn. Jen, I'm going to move over to some GE-specific questions, and I'm going to kind of lead down a path which will lead in kind of the Port of Los Angeles and some of the great work that you and the team are doing there. But I'm going to kind of start higher level around just GE transportation and maybe have you answer a couple of questions for this group here. And, the foundation is GE's always been able to differentiate through kind of innovation and forward thinking. And, can you describe and quantify this an interest or benefit of visibility to the data that's currently driving your core strategies as a company for innovation?
Sure. I'll give two examples. One is more of an internal example. So in a prior life, I worked kind of in IT with GE, focused on supply chain digitization. And one of the projects we worked on was actually what we called sourcing big data. So as background, GE across all of big GE spends about $40 billion on direct materials, and it spends that across hundreds of different systems, just given the size and scope of the company. And so what we did was we brought all of that purchasing data into one system. Tommy, you previously mentioned descriptive analytics. We did a lot of descriptive analytics on that data. So bringing in data from hundreds of systems, literally doing descriptive analytics, and from that we found a lot of interesting things. We found we were buying common parts across different business units at different prices. We didn't have common payment terms with our suppliers. All of those types of things, and essentially weren't leveraging the scale of the company like we could. And so through that, we actually ended up saving about $40 million a year across the company just by kind of renegotiating our contracts with prices we already had and leveraging our scale, which was a huge impact to the company. And before that, how it was working is using siloed systems, not kind of connecting across them, and honestly tracking deflation and things like that in Excel files. So that's an example that demonstrates moving away from siloed data sources, connecting within and across systems, and also kind of getting away from, leveraging Excel for analytics and instead, doing true big data and analytics can really get you meaningful benefits. Secondly, one of the things that we do is we provide TMS solutions to short-line railroads across the U.S., and our TMS is essentially a backbone operational system for railroads, and it automates and manages the day-to-day operations of any railroad. The companies that don't use a system like this still, literally work with clipboards and, manual processes versus our system, which automates, building trains and running the operations. And, our railroads that use our system save millions of dollars a year in doing that, just true benefits. And that's because they're able to increase velocity and operate more efficiently and reliably using a system like that.
Great feedback. Sorry. Yeah, Jen, great feedback. I was going to ask if you could maybe you credited ICE Foundation there and kind of walk that into some of the current initiatives that you and your team are involved in, with others like the Port of Los Angeles, to kind of take the things that you've been able to build and to really enhance over the past couple of years, and how that's applying to the Port of LA. And I mean, based on what I've seen, that's the first iteration of a much larger global project that will involve many ports and many groups across multiple continents. But could you kind of walk us into that project as well, and what that means as it relates to the last conversation?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I'll take that first example, that internal kind of simple sourcing example. Essentially, what we did was pull data together across kind of information and data silos, right? So applying that same analogy to the Port of Los Angeles, essentially what we're doing right now is reaching across, similarly, data silos that exist in the entire supply chain ecosystem at the Port of LA, America's largest port. And by bringing in data sources from shipping lines, from marine terminal operators, from railroads, and sharing that across the entire ecosystem, so to all of those stakeholders, also to the trucking community, chassis providers, and VOCCs, and just making that data available to everyone that's going to touch that box and has, is a party to that shipment 14 days in advance in some cases. It's enabling better planning, and it's leading to better throughput at the port. So a couple of examples. today or before the system, railroads and chassis providers and even truckers didn't have information to the inbound cargo on the vessels more than 2 or 3 days in advance at best. With our solution, we're making that inbound cargo information and details about that cargo, for example, where it's going, what the final destination is, available to everyone 14 days in advance. So if you're a railroad and you're heading west into the Port of LA, it helps you better plan your equipment. If you're a chassis provider, you can look and see that you have a spike of 40-foot containers coming in 6 days, and you can plan your inventory levels accordingly. Similarly, if you're a trucker, we're building a universal appointment scheduling system, and we're also simplifying the way that you return empties to the port. The ports of LA and Long Beach it's a massive gateway, 13 different terminals. To return an empty container, a trucking company has to look at 13 different websites to know who's accepting 40-foot MRS containers, as an example. We're simplifying that, putting it in one place, keeping it up to date in real time, which is going to enable productivity for the dispatching team, but also enable truckers to more easily make a full turn. And then, visibility to inbound rail, to understand what's coming at them. It helps with yard planning for marine terminal operators. And so, of course, ultimately, all of this is for the benefit of our customers, the shippers, and we're providing visibility to all of this movement to the shippers in a secure way, so that they can get more real-time information about what's happening within the port and where their box is. Ultimately, if you add all this up, right, what we are projecting is that when this is fully in place across all the Port of Los Angeles, which is July timeframe of this year, we're going to see 8 to 12% productivity improvements because of the layering effect of some of those examples that I gave.
Well, first of all, I think the project itself is going to yield big benefits for all the companies that are involved.
Thank you.
Jen, if you step back, Jen, and I kind of an echo. Your phone. I have to go to mute. Yeah, that's much better. Thank you. Yeah, Jen, what I love about something that you said as a part of that was it's a broader, more global view into value. And you mentioned inventory in that discussion, which I think is critical, because if we look at a kind of a global supply chain, obviously inventory is the biggest cost component, and getting that end-to-end visibility and being able to drive value through those core components is ultra critical. And also today, as we all know, most solutions today are modular, and they're not streamlined as a single platform. So being able to do that creates a platform to work from that's going to drive this. It's going to be invaluable to all the constituents, everybody you mentioned, from port operations to the local trucking to the rail providers. It's going to be invaluable, and obviously customers and shippers. So that to me is a huge item. Thank you very much for that overview. That was great. I've got a follow-up question for you, Jen. I'm going to hold it. I'm going to go to Rob, and I'm going to circle back around with you if that's okay with you.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So, Rob, I'm going to move over to Estes and maybe talk about some things that are happening on your side that you haven't touched on already. But, kind of the highest level question I would ask is, what are you doing to differentiate the Estes organization through digitalization, and kind of the gaps that you think you have and how you're addressing those? You did make a reference to some of these earlier, so it may be a bit redundant, but I wanted to ask that question.
Tammy, thanks. We, as an organization, have evolved, and today putting a significant amount of importance to strategy. Have a lot of smart folks that are embedded in the strategy team that actually corral me for multiple days, which is a challenge in itself, to just really look out as opposed to just worrying what's going to happen today. And so I think that one has been the biggest thing that we have done. And certainly from that, Tommy, how we do IT, how we communicate with customers. LTL is a unique animal. I mean, we have 20,000 customers that some still tender us freight bills handwritten, and some are very technologically and send us APIs, EDI feeds. So we have the spectrum, and just working on how we can best serve that diverse customer base is really important. The other thing we are working hard on is we're a complete transportation provider. People think of Estes as just an LTL company, but it's still our largest component. But we have a forwarding group that does some great work in between air freight and asset-light solutions. A dedicated group that fills a need that is separate from LTL, and a final mile group, which we're excited about our solutions. So all that didn't just happen. Again, working hard to plan and to forecast a customer, and I say a customer, the market's needs, and work to have the solutions before a customer needs it.
Yeah, Rob, thanks. And there's a couple of things I'm going to add to some context based on what I know. Obviously, you mentioned other parts of the Estes family of companies. I've seen similar behavior across all those organizations, i.e. the Estes forwarding team and other groups that are thinking about ways to enhance the customer experience through end-to-end visibility as an organization. And I will say that, and I'm fortunate, I get to see a lot of companies in our space, the Estes companies, and Rob, your core strategy is led by Web Estes, but that just really breaking away from the pack as it relates to how you're thinking about the industry and how you're thinking about not only enhancing things like your API platforms, but figuring out new ways to communicate with customers to make them more efficient and Estes more efficient. Like, an example would be, I believe, I need to double check the timing, but sometime in late Q1, Estes will be releasing a volume less than truckload automation solution, which again is another example of where, especially with tight truckload capacity, Estes continues to drive value across the entire space.
Thanks, Tommy, for that unsolicited, unpaid promotion.
Yeah, I'm telling you what I see. But number two, Rob, a question is, it's more tactical in nature, but how do you continue to automate the life cycle of shipments to provide end-to-end visibility? And I know you've done a lot of work as a company around dimensioners and enhanced handheld performance and things that you guys are doing to kind of break away from the pack. But maybe you could talk about some of those things that are continuing to help you to differentiate in that end-to-end visibility space.
I mean, have a lot of things. Again, some that I can only pronounce and don't know how they work. Robotics is an exciting technology on repetitive functions that allow us to do things that had been done manually, clerically, that now can be done automatically with a very, very, very high degree of accuracy. Doing those because, and I don't want to make LTL sound so complicated, but a normal LTL shipment is touched, potentially by 20 to 25 people. So there are a lot of handoffs. Automating that whole process from the freight being tendered to the invoice being sent is a very important process, and you have to have that whole process automated to really provide that end-to-end solution. We're working very hard on that. The first, building block of that was our electronic dock. Because Estes starts with the letter E, we selfishly have everything. We have our eDock. And so eDock gives us visibility across our system in our terminal, where sometimes a shipment comes in and stays for 12 hours and then leaves. And in the past, there was no visibility. Now, either from outside customer or internal customers who are researching a shipment had that visibility real time. Dimensioner data, certainly as an LTL company, we rate our shipments by weight, but our cost component is driven by cube. And so developing dimensioning technology that certainly helps us make sure we have the right capacity at the right time. I tell my folks that when a truck leaves with 2 empty skid positions, that's like perishable fruit. It's gone forever, and we just are working to do a better job of making sure that we utilize all of our assets. When you have a tight driver capacity, tight equipment capacity, you just want to make sure that you're fully utilizing every component of your network. So, I think I rambled a little bit, but that's some of the things that we're working really hard on.
Well, no, it's great feedback, and this is probably a loaded question, so it's maybe a comment and a question. But I mean, by some of the automation that's been put into place across the network, you're essentially allowing potentially more network throughput. Obviously, it automates the door productivity and things you're doing in the network, and obviously P&D productivity. So it sounds like those are some pretty big enhancements that you guys have made and will continue to make.
We're rolling out this year, and we're certainly behind the parcel guys, but we'll have a P&D route optimization system where our drivers will have suggested routes that avoid left-hand turns across traffic, optimize based on customer appointment times and receiving times and pickup times. In the past, that was relied on the driver to keep that all in his Rolodex of a mind, but we're working to an extra shipment a day for a driver has a huge ROI, and we feel like the technology we'll have in the next year will give us that opportunity.
It's great feedback. And Dave, Ross, I'm gonna turn it to you. I just wanted to ask one last question for Jen and Rob, and then I'll kick it back to you so we can get some Q&A. But Jen, I'll come back to you. If what advice do you have, or what are the top 2 strategic items or initiatives that the group or groups that are listening can take away from this discussion today?
You want me to go first, Tommy?
If you could, that'd be great.
Sure. I'll just leave with wrap it up with 3 kind of points of advice when I look at kind of our learnings from Los Angeles and some of our other software products. I'd say first, be willing to pilot or test things. We started at the Port of Los Angeles with a pilot that we ran for about 2 months. That really enables you to try a new technology out quickly and prove the value to kind of the user group quickly, which helps you to ultimately get buy-in for a new solution and adoption. So I'd say that's a good way to get started, is piloting or kind of testing something. Secondly is try to think about digitization both within your organization and across your organization to other organizations. And what I mean by that is, of course, you got to focus on digitizing what you can control and the value that you immediately touch and provide, whether that's your entire business or a sub portion. But there's incremental value to be gained by digitizing across to other organizations, like we did across GE business units, or like we're doing across the Port of LA ecosystem. There's where systems aren't talking today. If you can enable that, there's a lot of value to be delivered through that. And then the third is really strong leadership is a key ingredient to all of this to drive change and adoption. And I think you can see that with Rob and what he's driving within Estes. But you have to have a strong leader like that in your organization to make kind of a digitization or IT transformation type of initiative successful.
Jen, perfect recap. Thanks a bunch. Rob, 2 or 3 things from your standpoint?
Tommy, the speed of change is accelerating geometrically. I would say, as I look at the transportation companies, Estes in particular, and the customers that we provide services for, collaboration is a much overused word, but really working together, using the technologies to move us out a little bit out of the Stone Age and into the modern age has got to be critical, and that's got to be a two-sided involvement. One side communicating, the other side not hearing does not work. I will tell you, if you look at the LTL space, again, I mentioned it was a very consolidated group or concentrated group is a better word. I know we are, and I think the others in the group are getting more knowledgeable about the cost associated with a customer's business, not just on the movement of freight, but how we back office associate with them, the cost or lack of cost that we have with a customer because of the good way they communicate with us or the difficult way they communicate with us is going to be increasingly more important. One of my largest customers has adopted a very sophisticated, very carrier-friendly freight payment system where we have very easy resolution programs, and we actually, in our costing model, give them credit for that, which is significant. On the other side, there are customers that still use certain freight payment companies that for me, tend to sometimes think they try to figure out every way not to pay versus working collaboratively. And we're, just like we credit some people for lack of or lower work required to service their accounts, we put a debit on the other side if somebody requires more work. So I would just say, as a company, both sides of a transaction, the importance of using every opportunity digitally to work together is critical.
Great, Rob. Thanks for the feedback. Jen and Rob, thanks a bunch. I always enjoy conversation and some great feedback for the group today. Dave, I am about kind of 9 minutes over our timeline, but I want to turn it back over to you. And if there's some Q&A that we have time for, I'd love to get some feedback and questions from others.
Absolutely, and it was a soft timeline, Tommy. The content was terrific, so you're well within any timeline that was actually constructed. So, Kate, if you could open it up for Q&A, that would be helpful.
Certainly. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is now open for questions. If you have any questions or comments, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone at this time. Pressing star 2 will remove you from the queue should your question be answered. Lastly, while posing your question, please pick up your handset if listening on speakerphone to provide optimum sound quality. Please hold for just a moment while we poll for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. And while you're getting that together, I'm just going to kick off with one. Tommy, you mentioned early on in that Gartner survey that the leaders in supply chain were much more likely to be early adopters of technology, while the laggards were more conservative in their approach. But we've always said that technology doesn't make stupid people smart, but it can make smart people more efficient. Rob and Jen, when you're looking at investing in new technology, how do you make sure you're not just throwing a bunch of money down the wrong hole and that it actually is something that improves your business? Because spending more on tech does not always equal a more productive business.
Tech dollars are not like real dollars. Sometimes it's monopoly money. I mean, it's big dollars, but used correctly, they have huge ROI. What we've again, evolved to is a new methodology where we're more agile, not made, a project takes 2 years to get done, and doing it more on the fly and reaching certain benchmarks. Very excited about that. We have a legacy system that is from 1984, so it's been enhanced, but still has some of the green screen issues, and we've looked long and hard and invested in some technology that's going to allow us to transition, still use the AS400 as a production machine, but have other technologies that work separately or integrate with that. So that's about all I know.
I think those are great points, especially about kind of agile methodology, et cetera. I'd say kind of along the same theme with we're making a big technology purchase or partnership, we always like to test it out and pilot it, like I said before you get into, a super long multi-year agreement, before you make a huge investment in something. Try it out, get feedback from kind of your internal and external stakeholders, and make sure it's going to be a good fit.
Excellent. Kate, are there any questions in the queue?
Yes, our first question today is coming from Stephen Dowse. Please announce your affiliation, then pose your question.
Hi, it's Steve Dowse from Res One here. I actually have a question for Jen. In regard to blockchain, I think you mentioned we all see that as a disruptor, a potential disruptor in lots of areas in our industry. But I was just thinking from the GE vision around Port Optimizer and how you see blockchain playing into your vision there, and an extended question is how you would see blockchain enabling potentially interoperability with other players in the ecosystem. And here I'm thinking of the recently announced IBM Maersk joint venture.
Oh, that's a long question, and I don't know that I can appropriately answer your question in 2 or 3 minutes. But so what I'd say is, we've had discussions with IBM and Maersk to understand what they're doing and to try to form some hypotheses, and that's all we have at this point about how blockchain will be eventually a part of Port Optimizer. There's a few use cases that you can think about, in kind of the maritime shipping space. There's blockchain could enable customs clearance. There's you could leverage blockchain, distributed ledger, smart contracting type of technology to fully digitize, the paperwork associated with moving the cargo from all of the stakeholders that touch it. So I think the opportunities are immense. And so we're keeping a very close eye, as I said. I think it's too early for me to comment on, who we'll partner with and where we would start. I think it's got to mature a bit more, but we're paying very close attention. And then separately, happy to talk about this in a lot more detail as appropriate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question today is coming from Scott Conklin. Please announce your affiliation, then pose your question.
Yeah, hi, this is Scott. I'm with Dedicated Systems, a trucking company out of Wisconsin. We've heard a lot about blockchain and kind of been focused over that for the last year in smart contracts and trusted ledgers and that. But I guess where do we also bring in with hardware and focus for things like IoT? How do we manage that bridge and that future? Because both of them are kind of escalating at the same time, and I don't want to get lost on one and then miss the boat on the other.
So is your question more about the kind of convergence? You mentioned hardware. Is your question more about the convergence and how this all kind of plays into the IoT environment?
Yes, sir. How do we focus? Where do we look to? Should we prepare for IoT within the transportation industry? Are there things that we can prepare for IoT, or should we just kind of stick with one road, which is kind of more of the blockchain and those kind of things right now?
Well, I think that I'll give you my opinion, and then Jen and Rob can chime in as appropriate. I would say that the blockchain is going to be an evolution. You know, as you see kind of the general ledger methodology of blockchain kind of tie across, it's going to play itself more out into a lot of the settlement areas probably initially, and then have growth over time. My opinion is you focus on the foundational attributes of your data and how you communicate. Because, again, if you're stuck in a situation where you have high amounts of legacy technology, you're going to be stopped before you try to start. So it's how do you enhance that base platform, and then, you know, if you keep a pretty close ear and you're one of those adopters, you can evolve with other technologies as they move, but at least you'll have the ability to do so.
I agree with everything Tommy just said about blockchain. Specific to IoT, I think it's, you know, probably for most companies, and broadly speaking in the transportation space, it's an and, not an either or, in my opinion. But with any technology, I think you've got to start with the problem you're trying to solve and then choose the technology from there. You know, one use case for IoT is like asset performance management, as an example. So if you have big assets that are expensive, that require a lot of maintenance, you can put sensor technology, sensor devices on that asset, and then leverage that real-time data about the health of that asset to do things like optimize your maintenance cycles, track fuel, and then you can start to do interesting analytics to reduce fuel costs, reduce your maintenance expenses, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, you know, that's one example, but broadly speaking, I think you've got to take a big look at what problems do you want to solve with technology and work backwards from that to determine, does blockchain solve it? Does just kind of simple descriptive analytics solve it? Does something like IoT edge device technology solve it?
Excellent. Kate, do we have any more questions in queue?
We have no further questions in the queue at this time.
Okay, I got one last one to wrap it up, and that's going to be directed at Jen on the Port of LA optimization you're working on. What are the biggest challenges? What have been the biggest problems in getting to where you want to be across all of the parties in the supply chain? And how do you see that working itself out?
Great question. I think the biggest challenge with any kind of community collaboration tool, and that's essentially what this is at the base platform level, is getting people to just be willing to share that data, educating that it's not sensitive data, it's not competitive data, and, you know, then getting people to participate, both from a sharing of their data standpoint, but also an adoption of a new tool standpoint, because, you know, something like this didn't exist before. The way that we address that challenge is a lot of education, and like I said, starting with a pilot to let people test it out, and then that increased the interest, and now we're seeing more adoption. The second thing I'd say is we've made the user group a part of our development process. So we sit down with them and say, if you had this data, how would you like to see it? Tell me more about that. Let me see how you do your job today so this solution fits in with what you do. And so that user feedback is critical, I think, as well to gaining adoption and getting past that initial reaction of maybe I don't want to use this, maybe I don't want to share my data.
Excellent. Well, with that, we're a little over the noon time, but it was such excellent content that felt well worth it. So Tommy, Rob, Jen, thank you very much for joining us. Thank all the listeners out there as well. And everybody enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a good weekend.
Hey, Dave, thanks. Jen, Rob, thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This does conclude today's conference call. You may disconnect your phone lines at this time and have a wonderful day. Thank you for your participation.